What is the creepiest glitch in the Matrix you've experienced? I knew my uncle had died. My mom had called me and told me the news. It was very sad. She told me in the middle of work and I told one of my coworkers. He expressed his condolences on my loss. A couple weeks later, my sister mentioned my aunt and uncle doing something. I said, but, he's dead. And my sister said no, he wasn't. I called my mom. No, he wasn't dead. To this day I'm still not sure how much of it my brain imagined and how much was real. Did I really talk to my coworker? Was I even on the phone with my mom at all that day? It still freaks me out knowing that my mind could fabricate so complete and real a memory like that. A little backstory. I was a total idealist back in high school, so when choosing a college I chose to go somewhere that none of my friends were attending so that I could strike out on my own in a finding myself sort of way. Well, I ended up making a few really close friends my first semester. I mean, these guys became like family to me in a matter of months. One day during winter break, one of those guys, my buddy Kimbo, had gone back home to visit friends and family, and on his return trip to our college he hit a bad patch of ice and got into a car accident and was killed. It hurt like a son of a bitch for a long time and I still think about him all the time. But anyways, a few weeks after Kimbo's accident, me and the rest of the guys were getting back from a party off campus, and as we were standing outside our dorm building smoking a cig, I felt my phone vibrating, and when I pulled it out I saw that I was getting a call from Kimbo's phone. Dumbfounded, I showed my friends the phone quickly and then answered. When I picked up, it just went directly to his voicemail, which played the same message it always had. It never happened again and we never really talked about it, but for me it was one of those "someone's looking after me" moments. I hadn't been doing very well after his death, but seeing his name show up on my cell phone screen one final time made me feel a whole lot better for a time and really helped me get out of the slump I was in. I have no idea how his phone could have possibly called me, and I doubt I ever will, but this was one glitch in the Matrix that I'll forever be thankful for. Rest in peace, Kim. But feel free to call again. When I was like 10 or 11, I was going to the beach with my aunt and her friends. There were 2 cars of us. To get there we had to go through a very large industrial area. We didn't know the direction, so our car was following the other. Suddenly, they did an unexpected turn, and so our driver had to take a sharp bend. In that moment we heard a very clear, loud voice inside the car saying, laughing, "Sharp bend, HM." The driver immediately hit the brakes. We looked at each other, puzzled. We all recognized it as a voice not belonging to any of us. In the very same time, we noticed that the other car has stopped as well. The other driver got out of the car with a scared face and shouted to us, Did you hear that as well?" They heard the very same thing inside their car. The area around was full deserted. Edit. Wow, thanks for the interest. A little bit of background. This happened in central Italy in the early 90s. My aunt used to act at the time and most of the other guys were theater actors. The voice scared the shit out of us because it was very clear, near, but not coming from a direction within the car you could distinguish, nor front, nor rear. Inside the car, but from no distinct place. It was like mocking us. We were scared, but soon someone started to say, "Hey, who of you did?" Remember, those were comedy actors used to do any sort of strange voice. This, till we noticed the other car stopping and saw the look of the guy driving that car. They all were as scared as us and told us, we heard this scary voice inside our car, and told the very same words we just heard. We were there, in a hot day, under the sun in an area with large streets and absolutely nothing and no one around us, no cars, no people, no buildings. We never figured out what happened. About a year ago I had a terrible nightmare. It started off me waking up in bed during a thunderstorm. As the room illuminated again and again from the flashes of lightning outside, I realized that the bed I was laying in wasn't mine. The head of the bed was against the wall the door was located on, and from my perspective I couldn't tell if it was open or closed. That is until I saw the face. At first, just the nose and jaw broke past the door frame, but then an entire face slowly passed through the doorway. I tried to yell, "Who the fuck are you? Where the fuck am I?" but it felt like I had lost my voice. No matter how hard I tried to scream, nothing came out, and this person continued to enter the room, looking dead ahead, away from me. Then, just as the person was completely into the room, their head snapped towards me, and it locked eyes with mine. I tried to get out of the bed, but felt completely paralyzed. The person started making their way to me, but with every step their body contorted in ways that would break a normal person's bones. Their neck snapped so the back of their head touched their back, their jaw lay flat on their chest, their arms had broken at the shoulders and migrated to their back like wings. Just terrifying shit. And just before they reached me, I woke up. The next day I told my mom about it, and went into great deal about the room. Turns out it was almost an exact copy of my room when I was a baby. We moved out of that house when I was super young, like I have no idea what the insides to any room look like. Just kinda weird I guess. Edit, so I guess I have sleep paralysis. Cool, cool. As I type this I am already feeling déjà vu. I've always wanted to share this part of my life with someone but have never been able to. So, I'll just tell a bunch of people on the internet. One day I was walking to work and all of a sudden had an urge to walk a different path than usual. I work downtown in a big city. It was a strange spur-of-the-moment urge to walk a different way that changed my life forever. I turned into an alley I had never seen before. As I remember it, I made it about 15 feet or so when an actual glitch happened. Everything in my mind scrambled. I felt like I didn't have a body anymore, just that I was a semi-conscious entity floating through some weird dimension. All of a sudden in the array of different colors and shapes a vision came to me. It was a bunch of strange-looking people that in my mind resembled businessmen in suits. They looked startled and panicked that I could see them. One of the people made a quick movement and everything turned to black. When I regained normality, I was on a completely different street. It was the same street that I always used to walk to work. I felt sick, and severely disturbed/depressed. I've never done any hard drugs, never experienced any hallucinations, never have had anything like this happen to me. The weird thing is, when the glitch was correcting itself and I could see those people watching me like a caged animal, I had the feeling that I knew I was being controlled. It still bothers me very much to this day. TLDR had a moment of spontaneity, caused a real-life glitch, life has seemed different ever since. I don't know if this is a source of consolation or not, but a long time ago I had a conversation with an old workmate who described much the same thing. The detail is hazy, but he said one day he in his house when he felt a sudden need to go outside and stand on his lawn, he claimed it was the strongest clearest feeling ever, and on doing so he experienced a sort of wobble. He just said everything was screwed up for a moment, and he experienced a feeling of detachment/outsideness when it passed. He tuned to go back inside. Now, while talking to me he got quite upset at this point, and asked me not to think him crazy, but he said the next thing he saw was his car parked in the street and it was the same model/registration but a different color. He was so thrown at this, and then more so because then his wife came out to ask what he was doing, and he said he realized she was in all appearance his wife, but somehow not his wife. He said from that point on she liked food she had claimed to hate before, and sometimes brought up memories, he said had zero relation to things they had done in the past. He said things like his route to work was still the same but somehow different. He said there were buildings on the way that either he had missed in the 6 years he'd driven past them 5 days a week or had just appeared overnight. He even said some people he remembered from other departments in work had just vanished, and asking about them brought total incomprehension from other people. He was a totally regular healthy guy, but he said he measured his life in relation to that afternoon. There were things that happened before the change, and everything afterwards. He went to say he was now living his life with a feeling that about 15% of it had spontaneously changed that afternoon. We moved on, and drifted apart since then, different jobs, but I've never really felt so sure about the permanence of reality ever since. When I was a teenager I had 2 really intense dreams one night. The first one was about an online friend of mine calling me to say she'd broken up with her boyfriend, and I sang a few lines of Seal's "Don't Cry" to her over the phone. The second dream was finding a real-life friend dead body floating in her bathtub. I didn't think anything of it up until I logged online that evening and the online friend came online to tell me her boyfriend broke up with her. I immediately asked if I could call her, and she said no. I remember thinking that it meant something, like I could change it. Not long after, my phone rang, and it was real-life friend from the dream calling me. I was completely freaked at this point, but talked to her normally. She was just talking about school and shit, up until I realized I heard a splash in the background. I asked her, "Are you in the tub?" And when she said yes, I felt like my heart had stopped. I asked her, "What did you do?" She didn't answer me right away, and then, after a very long pause, she told me she'd taken an entire bottle of pills and chased it with mushrooms and vodka. She'd gotten scared waiting for it to hit her, so she called me so she'd hear someone's voice. I hung up and called 911. By the time they got there, she was unconscious, but alive. Today she's a mom to a beautiful little girl, and she's okay. I was heading home with my dad. We stopped at a drive-thru. I start feeling more and more anxious for no reason, to the point where it makes lightheaded and sick to my stomach. We have to wait a little bit ahead, because they gave us the order wrong. So I sit there, feeling like shit, and it suddenly comes to me an urge to call my brother. He was trying to call us. He was in a car accident. No one died, some got seriously bruised, he was only shaken. I told him to shut up and get as far away from the car as possible. He didn't understand but followed through, trying to call some of his buddies, and I could hear them calling him a wuss, him giving up and getting far, and then a loud noise, people shouting. After the whole shit was over, he told me what happened. His drunk friend tried to impress some girls in the car, hit the gas, drifted and hit the bottom of the car on some rocks, completely fucking with the engine. They stood near the car, the driver still inside trying to turn the engine back on. The hood burst in flames and the car started to burn fast. The driver managed to get away, but got severely hurt. Some of the guys and girls who stood around were hurt and burned too, but not as bad as the driver. My brother was the only one with light bruises from the whole thing. He told me that when I ordered him to get away from the car, he was in front of it, inches from the hood. I never experienced anything like this before and after, just this once. It's just a fucking weird memory. I don't remember what I was thinking. I remember it like watching a movie and seeing myself and everything from an outside angle. This happened when I was 11. I still remember it like it was yesterday. My grandfather was getting old and had been in and out of the hospital a few times that year. At that moment he had been in the hospital for probably 2 days. We had gone into the hospital to visit him, where I gave him a big hug and told him I loved him and would see him tomorrow. That night, I went to bed, and had the most beautiful dream. My grandpa came into my room and sat in a rocking chair in the corner. He invited me into his lap and told me he was going away for a while and that someday he would see me again. I shouldn't worry, because everything was okay and he wasn't in any pain. I smiled at him and gave him a big hug and told him I understood. I then looked over at my brother sleeping in the bunk below me and asked my grandpa if we should wake him up and tell him. When I turned back around to get a response from my grandpa, he was gone. I ran to the window to look out onto the front yard. There he was waving at me. He whispered, "Go tell your mom and dad exactly what I told you." I looked back at the door to my room and then back at the front yard, and he was gone. I immediately woke up, ran to my parents' room and turned on the light. I told them exactly what Grandpa had told me. They told me it was just a dream and to go back to bed. I told them again exactly what Grandpa told me. Again, frustrated, it was 2 a.m., told me to go to bed and we would talk about it in the morning. Just then the phone rang. It was the hospital. My mother started sobbing. Grandpa had passed. At that moment she just sat there with my father staring at me. I still remember their faces. They both looked at each other, then me, then each other, and finally smiled and stopped crying. They gave me a big hug and told me they loved and to go back to bed. They ended up going to the hospital that night and my aunt came over to watch us. But we have never talked about that night since. In fact, I don't think I have ever written about it, which explains the tears rolling down my cheeks right now. Wow, that was liberating. And I am glad other people have had these types of things happen. It happened in early 2000 when I was working at a juvenile detention center in a small town in Oklahoma as a corrections officer. I was working nights at the time and went to work at 9 p.m. This one night when I arrived for work, my supervisor looked confused and asked me what I was doing there. I said, "I work tonight." And he said, "But they said you called in a few hours ago saying that you were sick." I was a bit confused and said, "It must have been someone else and they got the message wrong." After everyone else showed up for work that night, it was a bit more weird, but we carried on as usual and assigned everyone their places for the night. I went to work in the control room where I usually work. The control room is the center of the prison that has direct control over the cameras, doors, phones and everything. After I relieved the guard on duty and settled in for the night, I looked at the message that said I called in. It said that I had called at 6:50 and said that I had gotten sick while out cleaning up after the storm. There had been a storm the night before and it was a bit bad, but not anything that I had to go out to clean up. It was truly weird. The supervisor came into the control about that time. He was also a friend of mine outside work and we started talking about it, and how odd it was. I decided to call my wife at home and tell her about it while he was still sitting there. I picked up the phone and dialed. After 2 rings, a man picked up the phone and with a raspy voice said, "Hello." I did not know what to say for a few seconds. I looked at the phone to make sure I dialed the right number, and I had. After a few seconds the person said, "Hello," again in the same raspy voice. I said, "Hello. Who is this?" "This is Taylor." "Who is this?" the person said. My head started spinning because my name is Taylor also. I said in almost a scream, "Where is Ann?" He said, "Ann's in bed." "Who is this?" I dropped the phone and told my supervisor to ring me out. I had to get home, and I took off towards the door. I could hear Dave pick up the phone behind me and say, "Hello," followed soon after by, "What the fuck," rather loudly. I ran to my car and drove home faster than what was legal, my mind racing the entire time. I busted through the door and my wife was sitting watching TV and was shocked at me being home. I asked her who was there and she said no one has been here. After a rather long talk with my wife, I went to call the prison to tell them what was going on, but the phone was dead. I went back to work and when I came in, Dave was acting weird and asked me, "How the hell are you doing this?" He told me that when I left, he picked up the phone and the person on the other end sounded like me. He kind of freaked out and hung up the phone. A minute later, as he could see my car leaving the parking lot, I had called back from home and asked what the fuck was going on. He said that I was a bit irate and said I was sick and did not feel like playing these games and was telling him to stop prank calling me, and hung up. After convincing him I had no idea what was going on, we went back to work. Later, I find out that the phone line for my area had been knocked down the night before by the storm. This is absolutely the strangest thing that has ever happened to me. 10 years ago I was returning home from a road trip with 2 friends. I received a phone call from my parents asking when we would be arriving, and I explained that we were about 25 minutes away. About a minute later we came around a bend. It was a full moon and we could see the reflection from a lake below us, and other than that the road was completely empty. Suddenly everything went completely dark in the car, no lights from the dash or gauges or headlights on the road. The music also stopped, and restarted at the beginning of the CD we were listening to. There was now a vehicle pulled over by the police about a quarter mile in front of us that hadn't been there a split second before. I assumed I had dozed off for just a second as it was late. I thought it was still quite peculiar, though. After about a minute, the driver of the car tuned the music all the way down and said, "Did that just happen to anyone else?" The other passenger in the back seat sat forward abruptly and exclaimed, "I thought I just fell asleep." We then realized that the clock in the car was reading an hour later than it just had a minute before. To keep ourselves from freaking out, we decided that the car had possibly had a momentary electrical failure and reset the clock to an odd time, turned off the dash lights, headlights, and gauges, and restarted the CD player. But when we arrived home 25 minutes later, we were 1 hour late. I am missing an hour of my life, and to this day have no idea how it happened. Setting: acid trip when I was 25 or so, at this really cool music festival called Rustler's Valley, in the mountains in the east of South Africa. So, at the time I was taking a fair amount of acid, really enjoying what it did to my mind, but not really enjoying the actual trips at all. Mentally they were really hard work. I eventually figured out acid was not very good for me, personally. Anyway. Early that night, going up, I was sitting somewhere, with someone, on the ground next to one of the stages. At some point I became aware of someone standing in front of me, looking at me. For some reason it gave me the most extreme chills, and I couldn't look directly at this person at all. I wanted to get up and leave, but somehow that just felt like a completely wrong thing to do. The person eventually walked away, after what felt like a really long time. The night went its course after that, and like any old acid trip, turned out to be several successive trips between hell and Valhalla. Much later, early morning hours, coming down, I walked around aimlessly, and got to this spot next to one of the stages, where I spotted someone wearing the same jeans as I did, which was kind of unlikely, because I used to make my own jeans from very bright and busy curtain fabric in those days. As I got closer, I realized it was me, from earlier that night. I stopped in front of myself, trying to figure out what to do with this bombshell, and then noticed how uncomfortable I was making earlier me, and ended up just wandering off, completely freaked out. After that trip, I still took mushrooms quite often, they always agreed with me, but that was my last acid trip ever. In my teenage years my family was invited to a wedding that was taking place at a private residence in the rolling Vineyard Hills in Oregon. It was way far from any sort of commercial buildings and the residences were spaced out quite a bit. The driveway from the road to the house was over a quarter-mile long, and when we got there someone by the road told us there was no more room at the property but we could park on the side of the road and they'd shuttle us up. Sometime that night after some people had left, my dad and I walked down to get the car so we can have it up there for when we want to go. About halfway down, I notice a big misty ball of bright white light from one of the furthest hills visible. I thought it was a smokestack and told my dad to look. He actually didn't bother looking and just told me there was nothing out there for miles. I told him a few more times that I saw a smokestack, and finally he just looked, and remarked, "Wow, maybe there is something out here." About a second later, it shot up and to the right before vanishing. We both thought that was very weird and had no explanation for what it could have been. We bring the car back up no problem, and stay a few more hours. On the drive back down, we were explaining what we saw to my mom and sister. As we approached the point where we saw it, I say, "And it was Juwas Tabuat, here." As soon as I said that, the dash chimes, the radio stops, and my dad says, "What the hell?" Every light on the dash had lit up, and a few seconds later, everything died. No motor, no interior or dash lights, no more headlights. We rolled until we stopped and the car would not do anything when he turned the key again. The only choice was to sit in the dark for 5 minutes, no one having a cell phone, and talk about how creepy that was. I kept an eye out for the light in the hills but didn't see it again. Every minute we tried to get going again and eventually it started up without a problem, and we went home. The car never had any issues with it doing that again. Back when I was in 5th grade, I remember sitting in class about to take an exam. It was one of those where the teacher would write down the question and we would all write the answer on our sheet. After about the 3rd question, I started to realize that I had already seen these questions, in the same order, and knew the answers. I honestly remember it being like Groundhog's Day, where I had this déjà vu moment like I had already sat through the test the previous day. I raised my hand and said we had already done these questions, and I got this dumbfounded look from the teacher and classmates. I looked around like seriously I'm the only one realizing this. "Oh really?" our teacher says, "What's the next answer?" I went up and wrote the next several answers that just came to my head. He looked down at his test, verified the board, then cancelled the test. Spent the rest of the afternoon with the teacher and principal being accused of compromising the test. The principal had him go through all his notes and lesson plans to see if he had briefed the test by accident in the past. They asked the other kids, nobody else remembered, they all scored shitty on the test. I've told this story before, most people do not believe it but I swear it is true. When I was in 8th grade I went to a corn maze with my best friend and her stepdad. This maze was in a neighboring town about an hour away. When we get there, They tell us we are the last ones through and point to a sign saying, "Do not touch the corn for any reason." We think this is just funny and of course do not listen. We go through the maze, have a great time, get scared and leave. This is where it gets weird. We leave at a little before 9:30, not sure the specific time, and start the drive home. My friend and I are singing along to the radio when her stepfather shouts and the road ends. There was no warning, just suddenly we were on gravel and dirt surrounded by cones. He keeps going, trying to turn around when the road is suddenly back. We are all a little confused but continue driving. We see a sign for I-65 and think this can't be right. Her stepdad stops at a gas station and we are in the city an hour and a half away and it's 2 in the morning. Before the road ending it was around 10:30. We drove on dirt for no more than 10 minutes and suddenly we are in an entirely different place and lost 3 hours. By the time I get home, my parents are freaking out as well as my best friend's mom. They do not believe our story and me and my friend were grounded and the stepdad was in a lot of trouble with her mom. To this day I associate that with corn mazes and haven't stepped foot in one since. At a friend's place back in 2008. When we were all teenagers, we had a cool shed at a friend's that we'd hang out in every weekend. It had 4 sets of bunk beds, tables, a fireplace, TV, fridge etc. the whole lot. One night we were all hanging out in there when I decided I needed a piss. I walked out the front door of the shed and started to walk to the right when I stopped. Now let me explain the layout here. As you walk out of the shed, his house is to the left and to the right is where we all parked our cars. Further out you're left with empty fields and trees. It was dark by now, the lights from the house illuminating the space between the house and our cars, but trailing off just past them. As I took a step to the right, intending to go behind the cars to relieve myself, I saw my friend's older brother standing there. I watched him for a good 5 to 10 seconds as he stood there, facing into the darkness. He then proceeded to walk behind a couple trees and a car before he disappeared. Confused, I walked back into the shed and asked my friend what his brother was doing by the cars. The conversation went as follows: me, "Hey man, what's your brother doing by the cars?" Him, "What do you mean?" Me, "He just walked off behind the cars." Brother, "I'm right here." I looked over and there his brother was, sitting down on one of the chairs with a drink. He was wearing the exact same clothes as I saw him in and the only way to get into the shed was through the door that I was standing in the way of. To this day, I've no idea how it all happened. I'm guessing I was just seeing things, but the fact that I watched him walk around for a good 10 seconds has always puzzled me. I've never had anything else like that happen. My grandfather died when I was 14. He died on a Monday night. I knew Tuesday waking up he was gone because my mom had let us sleep in. She didn't make us go to school and as I was going about my normal daily chore of doing the dishes, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. It was my grandpa standing in our sliding glass door. It wasn't really him, it was just a dark cloudy figure, but to me, it was Grandpa. I shook my head, shrugged it off as just my imagining things. It wasn't until maybe 30 seconds later when my sister comes running in from the backyard through that same slider yelling, "I saw Grandpa, I saw Grandpa," that it hit me. I started crying and said goodbye to him. That was in my freshman year of high school. The next 3 years, it snowed on my birthday. Couple things to consider: I live in Seattle and we barely get any snow, let alone in March. Also, it was only enough for me to see it was snowing before it would stop. Again, I thought I was imagining things. I didn't pay attention my sophomore year, as it was the first time it happened. My junior year again, I was washing dishes when I looked up and saw snow. I thought, that's odd, 2 years in a row. My senior year, I was sitting in math class when one of the other students disrupts the lesson to yell, "It's snowing." That's when I knew it couldn't be a fluke or my imagination. That was the last year it happened though, as after high school I moved to Southern California. I guess Grandpa didn't have enough power to make it snow there. I had always considered myself an atheist from about 10 until that happened. Now I'm just agnostic. This happened November of 2013. I was at home with my wife and child around 8 p.m. Sometimes in the winter we like to take a drive to a nearby donut shop for a tea and hot chocolate for my son. We had just returned home and had written off the idea, but something told me I should go. We hopped in the car and began the 10 kilometers trip into town. About halfway there, we saw a car in front of us swerving in the road back and forth. It was almost coming into oncoming traffic. My wife told me I should call the police as the driver seemed drunk. I took out my phone, and as I came closer to read the license plate, I realized it was my brother's car. My brother never had a history of drinking, and I was very concerned what was happening, so called him, and he said he was heading into town and would talk to me later. I told him I was behind him and he better pull over right now. We pulled into a small convenience store and he got out. After a talk I could tell he was drunk, and so I told him to get in my car and I would drive him home to my parents' house where he lives. I left his car in the parking lot and drove him home, leaving him to the wrath of my parents, who had become aware of what was going on. A month later my father and I were having lunch and he brought up the night I helped my brother. Turns out they had a long talk and my brother was suffering from extreme depression. He had broken up with his girlfriend and could not find a job, so he drank to dull the pain. When that didn't work, he decided to end his life by throwing himself off the bridge into the lake. It was only when I intercepted him that night that he had changed his mind. I was speechless as he told me this, realizing how close I came to losing my brother. I have to believe that it was a stroke of luck or some force intervening that kept my brother alive. He is doing much better now, knowing he has a family and friends to look out for him, and I am thankful every day that I decided to take that car ride into town. I've told this story before. 3 years ago my childhood dog died very suddenly and unexpectedly. She was sick for a few days, but turned it around and got better before dying very quickly and painfully, in my dad's arms. I live out of state, so I wasn't able to be there for any of it. It's a 6-hour drive, and I felt very, very guilty about her passing without me there. I had a very deep connection to her, and she had been my best friend for 12 years. I was devastated by her death. I couldn't work or eat or do much of anything. I was constantly bursting into tears. It was just awful. My heart just ached and I found myself apologizing to her for not being there. I just felt so guilty. One night I had a dream about her. I dreamt I was in this empty space and Charlie came running up to me, whimpering excitedly. She was licking my face and generally just freaking out, and I was sobbing. I knew she was dead, and I knew she was visiting me in my dream. I was very aware of it all. I kept hugging her and crying and apologizing, and she just kept licking my face and being affectionate. I woke up with tears streaming down my face and sat up in bed. I could still smell her distinctive smell, and on my sleeve I pulled off one of her hairs. She had never been to my apartment and I hadn't seen her recently. It wasn't a cat hair either, as Charlie was a collie mix and their fur pattern is very distinctive. It may all be coincidence, but it was so vivid and real. I like to think she was visiting to let me know everything is okay and to not worry. I haven't had a dream like that since. This happened around 1991. It's the middle of the night. I'm standing in my sister's living room and it must be a full moon, because even though it's around 1 a.m. and the lights are off, I can see clearly. There's a mixing bowl with popcorn kernels in the bottom on the floor in front of the TV and some rental VHS in a pile nearby. I hear a noise and turn around to see my sister's normally very friendly Labrador retriever looking like Cujo. Fangs bared, snarling, hackles raised. Suddenly there's a bright flash of light and I wake up like I hit the bed from a great height. I think that was a weird dream. Eventually, I fall back to sleep, and in the morning I call my sister, planning to tell her the story, but she preempts me by telling me about the weird thing that happened in the night. They woke up to the sound of the dog snarling at about 1 a.m. Her husband thought there was a prowler in the house, got a gun and went to find the dog. She was standing in the living room snarling at the middle of the room. He couldn't see anyone, so he flipped on the light. No one was there. The dog instantly stopped snarling and walked to her bed like nothing had happened. He checked the property and went back to bed. We talked a bit and I found out they watched some rental movies and, of course, we had popcorn. Why? My sister is a little woo-woo at times, so I decided not to tell her about my night. She lived about 450 miles away, by the way. About 5 years ago, I was at a Mexican restaurant with my now ex-fiancée having lunch. We are sitting munching chips and salsa waiting for our meals to arrive, when another group comes and sits down near us. I'm talking and laughing with her and just kinda looking around the room, people watching, and then I freeze. This guy who just sat down at the table near us is staring at me, hardcore. He looks so much like me that I myself would have gotten us confused if I was in a hurry. Same hair color/style, same beard/facial hairstyle, same sort of complexion/skin tone, eerily similar facial features. It was like suddenly cresting the hill of some dramatic roller coaster, and now your stomach has wormed its way into your throat and bedded down. We just stared at each other for several moments, and I knew he had the same feeling of, who the fuck is that, he looks just like me. We finally broke eye contact and never spoke or acknowledged each other again, although I would catch him looking back at me out of the corner of my eye from time to time, and I certainly kept stealing glances at him. It was just so uncanny. What makes me remember this now other than seeing this question here? I'm pretty sure she saw him again yesterday, and texted me last night asking why I didn't acknowledge her when she waved. I had just come back from a 15-hour shift. It was 10 p.m. I haven't worked double in a while, so I was so very tired. I was on the 91 freeway, in California, at the Atlantic Avenue exit before the 710 freeway. I was fighting sleeplessness a few minutes ago, and told myself I can stay awake, my exit home is only a few more miles. I dozed off. My internal clock kicked in, and I whipped my head back to wake myself up. What I saw more than shocked me, I was sitting in the car garage. I looked at the clock, and about 15 minutes have passed. So I dozed off for 15 minutes, although it felt no more than 1 second. I managed to drive in my sleepy state 3 to 4 miles, off the exit, 2 lights, punched in the code to open the public garage, parked my car, and woke myself up. I got out of the car and looked around, making sure I didn't run anyone over. Yup. No blood, no brains, no evidence of body tissues. I followed the news in the area for a few days, and there were no fatal hit and run. My grandmother passed when I was young, maybe 8. When I was around 16, I had a dream that I was hanging out with her and talking and catching up. She stood up in the dream to leave and I begged her not to and asked when I could see her again. She said nothing, but pointed to a calendar that had a date circle. I remembered the date when I woke up. It was several months in the future, and told my mom about my dream, as she was always interested in that kind of stuff. Several months go by and the date in the dream is approaching within the next few days. My cousin's husband gets killed in a freak car accident, and my parents fly across the country to be with family. They are to be gone over the date in the dream, and my mom, being superstitious about the dream, makes me promise not to leave the house that day. I agree, no big deal, my parents were going to be gone, what did I need to leave for? The day in the dream arrives and my friend calls me up to ride into the city with him. I say no thanks. Late that night, I get a call from him that he was in a bad car accident and his car's totaled. Passenger side all smashed to hell. Had I been with him? Me and my cousins went night fishing on the coast once. During the night all the fish get more active and supposedly come closer to the surface because there aren't birds snatching them up, so it's ideal for casting a rod into the waves. Anyway, I had been on the rods from 6 to 8 p.m. and was cold and tired, so I switched over with a cousin and tucked myself into the blanket and beach chair thing that we brought. It was getting to be dusk now and I looked out along the beach, and about 300 meters up I see a lump that looks to be moving its way up from the ocean and along the beach. I pointed out to my cousins who also notice it, but it's dark now and very cold so we couldn't really be bothered investigating. I keep looking back at it every 10 or so minutes because it's the only thing that is interesting when you're waiting for a fish to hook itself. And sure enough it is further up the beach each time, slowly crawling. I can see small limbs fluttering and trying to shift its large body forward, and so I assume this is a sea turtle heading into shore to lay eggs. I'm interested in seeing this a little closer and so I walk off towards it with a torch. As I get closer it stops shuffling about, but I can make out its form a lot better. Its domed back and flat limbs that are semi-obscured by sand. As I get to 50 meters I am struck by confusion. It's no longer resembling a sea turtle, but turns out to be a piece of driftwood. What the fuck? I say aloud. I had watched this thing crawl its way up the beach and distinctly remember seeing sand flick up around it as it crawled. I walked back to our fishing spot and looked back, and sure enough it has crawled up into the tree line. I know I'm late to the party, but anyway, this isn't about me, it happened to my sister. My mother's grandma died before my sister was born, so she never had the chance to meet her, which was a shame. She was such a lovely soul. One day my sister was playing in the backyard in the sand pit. My parents were just on the porch with our grandparents drinking coffee. My mum glances over to my sister, 3 years old when this happened, and she sees her looking at nothing and talking, almost as if she was having a conversation with somebody. My mum wasn't fazed. It's somewhat normal for young kids to have imaginary friends or exhibit left-of-center behavior, but nonetheless, she thought she'd just walk over to see what was going on. She sits in the sand pit next to her, and asks her who she's talking to. My sister replies with, "I'm talking to Nana." That's a bit strange because Nana is still on the porch drinking her coffee, but okay, she'll entertain my sister. "What do you mean, Nana is sitting over there?" My sister, still not really looking at my mum, just replies with, "Your Nana." At this point, my mum is just simply WTFNG all the way into the house. As soon as she heard this, she grabbed a photo album, took a photo of her Nan in her favorite dress and walked back to my sister. She asked me sister to tell her what Nana looked like and what she was wearing. Described it to the dot. My sister was never shown these photos. I, who was alive and had met her, couldn't have described her to even half the accuracy, just nope. My mum told me this recently when we were discussing random topics. The look on her face was actually slightly worrying because to this day she still has absolutely no idea how this is even possible. At work on my phone, please excuse errors, etc. I'm really late to this thread, but for once I think I have a good story, so I'm just gonna go for it. A little background. This is one of my earliest memories, so I was probably between ages 2 and 3, and I lived in a ranch-style home in a nice neighborhood. The only people at home were me and my mom. My sister was at school and my dad was working. It's a nice day out, probably right around noon. It's hot, so we've got the front door open with the screen door locked. I'm sitting on the couch in the living room, which is only 2 or 3 feet from the door, playing with a toy cash register. Scene set. I look up from my toy and see a man standing behind the screen door. I don't remember him walking up the driveway, just him suddenly being there. He's wearing a police outfit. I'm confused, and he just kind of smiles at me. I should mention that I wasn't scared at all. There was a policeman at the screen door, and in my young mind there was nothing off about that. So I called to my mom that there was a man at the door. My mom was in the kitchen, which was attached to the living room, so it didn't take long for her to come to me. She walked into the room and immediately I could tell something was very, very wrong. She paused once she saw the man, and then power walked straight for me, picked me up, and ran into the hallway where we couldn't be seen from the door. I remember being held close to her chest, and being extremely confused. She looked extremely frightened. We stayed there for a while, and eventually when we came back out, the man was gone. The memory ends there. Nearly 2 decades later I still don't have a clue what happened that day. A few years ago I brought it up with my mom, but she kind of just brushed off the question and I didn't push it. Now I'm just afraid to ask. I still think about it from time to time and I think it's insane how well I remember that moment, the texture of the couch, the toy, the policeman, his smile, my mother's face. I don't remember anything else in my life that well. The moment was just so tense that I don't think I'll ever forget it. Me and a buddy were taking a stroll at night on a beach in Florida, Lido Key Beach if it makes a difference, after a big dinner. It was midwinter and the wind was really whipping, had to be in the low 30s with the wind chill. Because of this, the beach was deserted. No one. Moon is out and lighting up the place so well everything is casting shadows. So we're talking and whatnot, when we notice there is a guy walking parallel to us, but right near the surf. Say we're near the sidewalk because no one in their right mind walks near the surf in winter, the water is freezing. I point him out to my bud Jim. Nothing really that odd yet, but this guy is keeping perfect pace with us. He's wearing a hoodie, so we can't see a face. Hands are buried in his pockets. We speed up a little, he speeds up at the exact same time. We slow down, he does too. Okay, whatever. My friend and I are both large guys and this is one dude. Jim tells me this guy might be looking for trouble, so be on your toes. I should mention that this being Florida, the beach is flat. Not even sand dunes. No place to hide. Everything is flat and wide open. It's just us and the mystery dude for as far as we can see. This guy is throwing off some pretty aggressive vibes. He's been following us for 15 minutes, and has now started staring right at us while walking, not even looking where he's going. I turn my head to my buddy and tell him this guy is nothing but trouble. I turn back. He's gone. There is no place this guy could have disappeared to in the 4 seconds I turned my head. No dunes, no lifeguard towers, nothing. It was hundreds of feet to the sidewalk where we were. Only place to go would have been the water, and that was a death sentence considering how cold it was. Me and Jim just stand there in stunned silence, looking in every direction in the bright moonlight for the person who we had been watching follow us for the past 20 minutes. I posted this before, so I'll just paste it. Not really scary but still weird. I lost time once. This happened about 8 or 9 years ago and it actually confuses me still when I think about it. Anyway, I used to work a swing shift from 3 p.m. until 11 p.m., Mondays through Fridays. So my routine would be clock out, drive to the convenience store, buy some crap to shove down my cake hole, get home, get into some trunks or whatever, sit down, turn on the TV, eat and surf the net, and not pay attention to Jay Leno, while waiting for Conan O'Brien to come on at 11:35. All of this took about 20 to 25 minutes from work to and home on my couch. Anyway, so one night, I get off work. Have to clock out right at 11 p.m. Do my usual routine. Get home and go to my room to take off my uniform, go to the bathroom to wash my face. I grab my food and sit on the couch, turn on the TV and some morning farm report is on. Check the channel. Yep, right channel. Where the fuck is Jay Leno? Don't even think about looking at my watch or phone to check the time. I decide to just wait and see if Conan comes on after the farm report. I eat and sure enough, the motherfucking Good Morning News program is coming on. I look outside and it's blue. It should be fucking dark out. I look at my watch and it's fucking 7 a.m. Double check my phone, yep 7 a.m. I'm not even tired like I should have been if I was awake all night. It was weird, man. But at the same time it makes me laugh thinking about me just standing in my room frozen like Robert De Niro in Awakenings all night lol, then coming to and not skipping a beat. Time for some Conan. Made an account just to post this. I was either 4 or 5, I can't remember for sure, but I know I was in school and still living in our first house. I only lived in that house for pre-K, anyways I need to give you a brief setup of the house. I slept by myself in a bedroom directly across from the only bathroom in the house. My parents' room was connected to the bathroom. It was all on one big hallway. Every night my parents would come tuck me in as my sister and them got ready for bed, so my door would be open and the bathroom light on. I could hear them talking in the bedroom but couldn't exactly tell what they were saying. My light was off but the bathroom light lit up my room enough for you to see. I was waiting for them to tuck me in when I saw a dragonfly or damselfly, I couldn't tell you exactly which, into my room. It was weird because I had never had bugs in my room. I couldn't tell anything else about it other than it was the most beautiful shade of blue I had ever seen. It flew directly into my face and then I woke up and it was pitch black and silent. It was late at night / early in the morning. I can't tell you for sure what happened because I thought I was about to go to sleep before I saw the dragonfly. But I woke up after it hit my face. I can't remember falling asleep before I had this, dream ache what you would call it, but I also never fell asleep in the dream, so it was like I lost 5 or so hours from when the dragonfly hit me in the face. When I woke up I ran to my parents' room to find everyone asleep. I woke them up and told them what happened, but they just played it off as a dream. I don't think it was a dream, but I don't know what it was. That's my break in the Matrix. A few years ago, I was living in this little wooden chalet thing, which was creepy for a number of reasons. Lots of little glitches happened there, but the worst one came when I was the only one left up. I had to go to the bathroom, but the light in the hallway was super bright and would wake up my housemates if I turned it on, so I figured, oh well, it's an L-shaped hallway and the bathroom's at the end, all I have to do is walk slow until I get to the wall and then turn. I do this, and hit the wall really quickly. Alright, I figure that I just misjudged it. It's pitch black, I should add, the chalet wasn't near any street lights, and the hall has no windows. I can't see my hand in front of my face, but I turn in the direction I know the bathroom is, and stick my hand out to feel my way in. I hit wall. I'm confused now. I turn the other way, and I hit wall. There's a moment of panic before I realize I must have wandered into the hall closet, and I feel a bit stupid as I turn back the way I came. I step forward, and I hit wall. Now I'm panicking, because there are walls on all four sides of me. I run my hands up and down the walls, trying to find a door, but there's nothing. It's pitch black, I can feel the walls touching me on all sides, and I cannot find a door. Finally, after what feels like hours, I find a light switch. It doesn't hit me that there's no light switch in our closet. I switch it on, and I'm in the hallway outside my bedroom door, at the furthest end of the hallway. To this day, I have no idea what happened. I didn't even investigate further then, I just went back into my room and locked the door. It still gives me the creeps to think about. While playing football in high school, I had some strange dream where my team won our third game in the playoffs, and I just passed it off as a good dream, and that was just optimal me. Well, the weeks leading up to the third game were completely normal, I forgot about the dream, went to school, played football, and so on. Finally the big day arrives, third game, still don't remember this dream. We win 28-26, and on the way home in the bus from the arena I was talking to a few teammates. When I asked them if we had a 28-26 game prior, they all said not in the last season. I swore we did, but I pushed it off and blamed it on being a football player. Anyways, we get back to the locker room of our school, we are throwing our pads in the lockers when all of a sudden our coach comes in and yells, "HEY," as loud as he can. Now this coach wasn't typically a nice guy, so we all looked at each other with an expression of, oh fuck, what did we lose/mess up. This is exactly when I remember the dream. I go wide-eyed, the coach is staring us all down, and I whisper to my friend, dude, he's about to say, why aren't you guys blaring the music? My friend chuckles, shortly followed by my coach saying, why aren't you guys blaring the music? My friend looked at me with the same wide-eyed look I had as we turned the music louder. To this day it was the weirdest shit I have felt. TLDR, had a dream, lost the dream, remembered the dream, passed the dream on to my friend, both in awe. I was at home having a barbecue on a Sunday afternoon, some friends were over with their kids, and I went upstairs to change clothes and noticed that one side of a large suitcase that I kept on the top shelf of my walk-in closet was pulled out a little bit, and it was unlatched, but not open, which was strange because I would have noticed it was unlatched before. It's a big suitcase but it fits fine on the shelf and it's been there for years and I never touch it unless I am going on a trip. So I absent-mindedly reached up and latched it, pushed it back more firmly onto the shelf and changed my clothes and went downstairs. No sooner had I gotten downstairs and sat down at the kitchen table there was this huge bang crash from right above us, which is where the closet is. Everyone was at the table except for my guest's 10-year-old son who was in the upstairs TV room playing a video game. I yelled up at him, Angus, what are you doing up there? And he said, nothing, just playing a game, and so I went upstairs and he was sitting on the couch playing a game. So I went into the bedroom closet and the suitcase was now sitting upright on the floor, unlatched, and at the far opposite end of the closet about 8 feet from the shelf. I put it back and asked Angus if he had been in there and he said no and I believe him, he's not tall enough to reach the shelf anyway. It is so strange and made so little sense that after everyone left I spent about 30 minutes testing pushing the suitcase off of the shelf, letting it tip off of the edge, seeing how and where it would land, and maybe it would roll once but never get anywhere near the far end of the closet and would always remain latched. Finally, when I was satisfied that I couldn't explain it, and my wife was telling me to knock it off, I relatched it and put it back on the shelf. It's been about 6 months now and every time I go into the closet I look at the suitcase and it hasn't moved an inch and I have no rational explanation for why it fell. I was on a ship, sailing as second mate, and I was having a really shitty trip. I had fallen in love right before I left. I had taken the blame for something the chief mate had done so he wouldn't get in trouble. I was getting off soon and he was a permanent guy, so the captain was pissed at me, etc. Just all around shitty from an emotional standpoint. Then one night, when things were at their shittiest, I had a dream that I was sitting on the beach with my grandmother. We weren't saying much, just hanging out like we used to, playing bridge. My grandfather had died a few years earlier, but as we sat there playing, I turned to see him walking toward us, wearing his usual outfit with the blue linen pants, but he wasn't limping anymore. He'd had a bad fracture below the knee and for the last decade of his life he had to wear a leg brace. But he was walking toward us taking big strides, wearing a big smile on his face and I just felt so happy. I could feel it radiating off of Grandma and it made me feel so much better. And it felt so real, like when you're only half asleep but totally aware of your dream. I usually keep a journal when I'm at sea and I even wrote about this dream the following morning when I got up. It put me in a better mindset and helped me carry on for the rest of the trip and deal with the trifling bullshit on a day-by-day basis. Well, when we got back to the West Coast and I got paid off, my dad came down to the dock to give me a ride home. An important note, we don't discuss bad news while I'm away on ships because it just makes it more difficult to do my job and there's nothing I can do about it anyway. So as I climb into the passenger side of his car, my dad hands me a booklet, the program for my grandmother's funeral. She had passed while I was on the ship. My dad told me the date that she had passed and when I checked, sure enough it was the night I had that vivid dream. It's spooky to think about, and I'm not religious, but I think somebody upstairs likes me. TLDR, had amazingly real dream of my grandparents being reunited that helped me through a rough time. Found out over a week later that it happened the actual night my grandmother passed away. A couple of years ago I was at my grandma's house with my family and we were just talking about regular stuff. My grandma was showing me pictures on her camera of her trip to Egypt which I was scrolling through from right to left, latest picture taken to earliest. The pictures of her trip soon came to an end and what appeared next on the small LCD screen was something that I still can't make sense of to this day. It was a picture of me standing between my grandpa and grandma. I didn't remember this particular photo being taken but that may have been because I'd had many other pictures taken with them. At first I didn't think too much of this photo, but then I took a double take to realize that I looked so much older than I did even at the time of looking at the photo. I was 17. The longer I looked at the photo made me confident that it wasn't due to any strange lighting effects or anything. The photo was dated for 2009, so I would have been 14 at the time of the picture, yet in no way whatsoever did I look 14 in this picture. I looked 20 plus years old, was much taller, had longer hair than usual, and IRC somewhat prominent facial hair, which I was definitely not growing at that age. I even showed the photo to my sister and even she was surprised as fuck at how old I looked. It really messed with my head at the time and still does. I remember entertaining weird far-off thoughts like that it could have been my future self with my grandparents in that photo instead of me. I went back to my grandparents' house again about a month later and remembered the picture. I looked through her camera trying to find the same photo but failed. It was certainly a bizarre and somewhat unsettling experience but I still hope to see that picture again someday. I fell asleep in typing class and had this strange dream of, falling asleep in typing class waking up saying, I gotta get out of here, grabbing my bag and leaving. Over and over I had this dream that day, a seeming endless loop. Waking up, face deformed from the keys pressing into my face, confusion, I gotta get out of here, and the door. It was like a nightmare due to the repetition, this prevailing sense of doom in the mundane. I mean I was just waking up over and over. A few seconds above my shoulder, me asleep, Emily typing furiously next to me with 80 words per minute. Then first person, dawning, speaking, fleeing. Never any danger, never any pursuit. Just shockwave alertness, I gotta get out of here, and I make an escape. So finally I wake up for real, everything is like the dream, teacher at the front of the room. Emily and her android fast fingers destroying the lesson. My face deformed, a little drool in the crevasse and I open my mouth. Fuck this. I grab my bag and leave the classroom to stunned silence. A few seconds later a transformer blew in the neighborhood. All the keyboards in the room got hit with a mild shock, nothing dangerous similar to that Russian roulette-style shocking game you can find at Spencer's in the mall on the highest setting, but I've always hated being shocked. When I was younger, early to mid-teens, I would get these weird spells, where when I was talking to someone their proportions would start to skew. Most commonly, it would seem like their heads were much too small for their body, but in a way it was always trying to snap back into the proper proportion. It doesn't happen very often if at all these days, 10 to 15 years later, but at the time it really was creepy, as if they weren't quite human or I was experiencing an alternate perception of space. Anyone else make any sense of that? I came to attribute it to the fact that my eyes were starting to weaken and my brain was learning how to compensate for my left eye getting much weaker than my right. Please subscribe to my channel. I might sound like a robot but I have feelings too.